For a second, everybody back on.
All right, hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the very first episode of UnScripted live here. We're going to be doing something we've never done before, and we'll get to a lot of things. But long story short, this is UnScripted, the Cardiac Hill podcast. I'm your host, Corey Cohen, and again, this is something that we haven't done before. We're doing a live and on-camera episode in honor of National Signing Day, which was yesterday, and we're going to be talking about all things involving Pitt football and recruiting in the class of 2016, and it should be a whole lot of fun. So without further ado, we're going to get started by introducing the guests. First up, we have, you know him, he's on UnScripted a good amount of the time. We love him, and it was actually his idea that we do this live for signing day. So without further ado, welcome Jim Hammett to the fray. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing well. A little tired after yesterday. I got up at 6 a.m. and just tracked the whole day. I didn't even do anything, but just you can only hit refresh on Twitter so many times.
Coming up next, we have one of the best members of the Pitt community. He's a member of Cardiac Hill. He's been on an episode of UnScripted, and here he is, J.D. Schroeder. You might know him as Static. J.D., how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Like Jim, I'm a little tired, but, you know, recruiting, game never stops type of thing.
Sounds good. And finally, we have, and again, this is very much live, and you'll notice that because one of our people is here with us in audio and in spirit, not yet with video. That is Chris Bruno. Chris is here. He's audio. He's here, but we don't have video currently. He's having some technical difficulties. That said, Chris, because you are here, how are you doing?
Pretty good. How are you guys?
All good on this side, and so without further ado, let's get it started. If anyone who's watching has any questions live, tweet at us. I'm at Corey E. Cohen. Jim is at Jim Hammett. JD is at Static with the 7 in there, and Chris Bruno is at Bruno Pittsburgh. And so again, if you have any questions, tweet it to us. Let us know what you think. But again, let's get started. We're first going to do a position-by-position rundown. We're then going to talk about Narduzzi and how effective he was. We're going to be talking a lot about the Penn State drama and the rivalry. And we're going to be doing, as we always do, the Three Rivers pack of questions at the end and a special Panther of the week. But let's get started with the first position, the most important position in all of sports, many would say, quarterback. In this class, one quarterback only, Thomas McVitie, a very talented one, many would say, from Cincinnati, from the Cincinnati area, and that's all they got. But the question is that all that they need in this class? They just had one. Chad Voitik obviously transferring out of the program. You have Nate Peterman for one more season. So Jim, is landing Thomas McVitie enough, just that one quarterback?
I'd say in the long term it is, because I wrote an article about McVitie, and I'm very high on his potential upside. But also at the same time, there was talks of maybe bringing in a junior college guy, maybe bringing in a transfer, kind of like they did with Peterman last year, because with Voitik leaving, it leaves you with Nathan Peterman, a quarterback, but it also leaves you with a redshirt sophomore with no game experience and 2 freshmen without game experience. So the quarterback position, you know, would kind of be in a bit of a rut if Peterman were to go down. I mean, at that point you're throwing someone into the fire. But I'm very high on McVitie. I like him a lot. I think he's going to be a great player down the line. But yeah, in the back of your mind, you wonder if a junior college guy would have made sense here.
JD, what do you think about just bringing in one quarterback recruit in this class?
I agree with Jim. Long term, I mean, I think McVitie can definitely be a future starter. I mean, you're definitely going to have people that, you know, look at you know, the different quarterbacks on the roster, and nobody sticks out quite, you know, oh, why shouldn't he be playing type of, you know, deal. But, you know, hopefully Pitt gets some luck this year and doesn't have one of their best players go down like last year, and, you know, you kind of just get through the season, hopefully with the same quarterback all the way through. I mean, hopefully you have the backups kind of challenging the starter. That's something you always want. But I think last year, the first couple of games, didn't necessarily hurt Pitt, but it kind of took away from Nate Peterman having some more time with his offense and getting into the rhythm of things, or when it was Chad Voitik, I felt like he never really got into the flow of things.
Very fair. And yeah, I mean, I have to agree with you guys. It would make sense to have a guy come in who's a graduate transfer. That said, Thomas McVitie, long-term, seems like he is going to be the answer, and I think all of us would agree with that. it really just comes down to this upcoming season. Are you confident in Peterman to stay healthy? And really produce on the field? Are you confident in Berkey to be the backup quarterback? Clearly the Pitt coaches are saying, yeah, they are confident. And so we'll see moving forward. Now, moving on to the running back position, you've got one, maybe two. Shontez Moss, he had Power 5 offers from Iowa and Indiana, no others, although Iowa this season obviously really impressed, especially after that Pitt game, the narrow loss for the Panthers. And then you have George Hill, a 4-star running back who's incredibly talented and can play both offense and defense. Pat Narduzzi hinted yesterday that there's a chance that he could play some offense. And we know with Whitehead last year, that's most definitely possible. When they say that someone could play two ways, they absolutely can. So with all this being said, you have Moss and you have maybe George Hill. Still on the squad, there's James Conner, there's Rashid Ibrahim, and Chris James transferred. So you no longer have him on the team, and there's Kadri Olesen, of course. And so with the guys that you have after the transfer, is bringing in Shontez Moss and George Hill, who might play some running back. Is that enough? Chris, we'll go with you.
Yeah, I definitely think it's enough, especially if James Conner comes back. Then you're kind of overloaded in the backfield. If he comes back, if all goes well, I mean, that's a huge if, and I don't think anyone's really thinking of that at this point. But I think it's enough right now, and with all the defensive backs they brought in this recruiting class, it's going to be kind of crowded there to see who can play and who can't. So you can always throw George Hill in on the running back side too. He was pretty explosive on his tape, and obviously had a lot of offers.
Jim, what do you think? Do you think that it's enough? And as Chris Bruno said, possibly bringing in George Hill to play on offense. Do you think that the Pitt staff should, with this very talented player, should play him at running back?
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously he's a very fast player. His 100 time in high school is outstanding. He's probably one of the fastest players on the team as it stands right now already. I mean, he's a tremendous athlete, and I kind of look at him, and I kind of like got the wheels turned a little bit. You know, the way Ohio State used Braxton Miller this year is kind of like a way I'm envisioning this whole George Hill thing to go, possibly. Just find ways to get him the ball because, like you said, you have 4 solid running backs with experience coming back next year. You have a freshman in Shontez Moss that's definitely going to see time down the line. He's probably going to redshirt this year. But with George Hill, he's a freshman that can make an impact, and you can find ways to use him, not just in the traditional running back sense. Kind of the way they use Jordan Whitehead, maybe save Jordan Whitehead playing offense by replacing him with a guy like George Hill.
And JD, what do you think about this? Do you think that it makes sense to play George Hill with who's still on the roster, the injury questions, Connor missing last season, Rashid Ibrahim missing last season with injury? Do you think it makes sense to utilize him, or should they save him for defense primarily?
I definitely agree with Jim, his point he made about using Jordan Whitehead. I think it said a lot about the staff's opinion of the running back position that, they used Jordan when they needed a game breaker, somebody that could, just punch through the hole and get you a touchdown, and I think George Hill is a guy that can do something like that. He's very skilled on defense, but if Pitt hadn't landed, some of the other great defensive backs that they did in this class, I would have been, no, we should use them on defense. They need more help there, but they got enough, other defensive guys that are high quality enough that throw George Hill on offense and see what he can do.
Very fair. So moving forward now to the wide receiver position, there's Ruben Flowers, who they got, a 4-star wide receiver recruit who many are saying could be a bit of a, I'm not going to say the next Tyler Boyd because those are big shoes to fill, but could be a player who can replicate some of what Tyler Boyd was able to do, at least maybe his freshman year. You also have Maurice French, who joined the team, and a late flip, Aaron Matthews. And we'll talk about the flips and Penn State and that whole rivalry a little bit later. But you have these 3 guys, Flowers, French, and Matthews. However, they did lose Juwan Winfrey and Darnell Solomon last minute. Winfrey was committed for a long period of time. He was a great recruit, 4 stars, and right about a few days before signing day, he backed out of his commitment, ended up going to Colorado, so he's going to be a Buffalo. And then you talk about Solomon, they lost him to a program South Florida, which obviously isn't quite at the level that Pitt is. They're not Power 5. So with missing out on Winfrey, missing out on Solomon, being last minute, even though you got the guys that you got, is that a concern that they couldn't land them, Jim?
I don't think so, because people that follow the situation closely, we know Juwan Winfrey left Maryland on bad terms. There was definitely some issues there. So we're kind of thinking, we're under the impression that maybe there was something more to the story that the Pitt coaches just found out, or maybe something else happened. So, yeah, he's a great player, 4-star talent, probably would have started next year in all honesty, but there's a reason why they backed off of him, and there's also a reason they did the same with Solomon. He was a late, kind of came out of nowhere that Pitt was recruiting the kid, and but he obviously came with a track record. I mean, all you have to do is Google his name and saw what happened. At one time, he was between Alabama, Auburn, Texas, USC. Then, his options suddenly became South Florida and Temple. And there's a reason for that. I don't need to get into it, but I think at the end of the day, Narduzzi mentioned yesterday at his press conference that he's going for character guys. So he kind of made like a little, remark saying we got character for character. So he was, commenting on how good of a kid Aaron Matthews is, and maybe how some of the other guys kind of blew their opportunity with some of their off-field actions.
And Chris, what do you think about, again, losing Winfrey last minute? Solomon, Jim just talked a lot about maybe off-the-field issues and the guys that they, were able to get, and the guys they missed out on.
Yeah, definitely to follow up on Jim's point, and I don't know if somebody could confirm this or not, but I didn't Winfrey, I know they backed off him a little bit, but he decommitted from one school while on a visit to another school to a third school. I mean, do I have that right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, he was at Memphis whenever the Colorado thing became. That was kind of a crazy night on the Pitt internet boards. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, so I mean, there's obviously some issues there, and with Solomon, and you bring in 3 guys. They're all intriguing. Maurice French, even though he was kind of lightly recruited, although someone made a run at him late, who he spurned, which was nice to see. But every single week you saw on the updates on high school highlights that he was just tearing it up his senior year. And then you bring in 2 guys that are 6'4". So you definitely have some intriguing players that are coming in at that position.
And JD, talk more about the guys that they are getting and the fact that they're losing Tyler Boyd. The players they're getting, Ruben Flowers, again, 4-star, big talent, French, and then Matthews, who they flipped late. Is that enough in terms of those guys, the guys that are on the roster still from last year? Is that going to be enough with the loss of Tyler Boyd for the wide receiver position to still be a good group?
I mean, replacing Tyler Boyd, I mean, people are having discussions of, when you talk about Tyler Boyd, you compare him to, the best Pitt wide receiver ever in Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, Tyler Boyd broke his records. He's got all-time, in terms of receptions, yards, all that kind of stuff. I mean, anybody would have been extremely hard to come in and replace Tyler Boyd right away. Having said that, though, I mean, I definitely wish that, they got somebody that was a little bit more, Flowers is he's a high-rated guy, but he's not a game breaker type of go up and get the ball type of receiver. But at the end of the day, they've got enough. They got some size with Aaron Matthews. I think he's a big, tall, freshman that he may not play, next year, but give him 2-3 years to develop his body, get some weight on him so that he's a little bit more physical and durable, and he'll be able to go up and get those balls. And Chris was talking about Maurice French. I believe Maurice French was rated as the New Jersey State Offensive Player of the Year, and then another Pitt commit, Phil Campbell, was the New Jersey Defensive Player of the Year. So, I mean, that kind of tells you a little bit about French in general, and as Chris said, he lit it up every single week in his high school games.
Very interesting. So that's the wide receiver position. Let's move forward to another spot, which is tight end. Now, when you talk about that position, Pitt only landed 1 tight end. That was a transfer, Chris Clark, who, while very talented, there's a decent chance that he doesn't play this season. Pat Narduzzi was talking yesterday about the fact that they're working on trying to get Clark eligible for this season, but that very well may not happen. Now, again, Chris Clark, #1 tight end recruit last year when he originally committed out west to UCLA, and then he committed to Syracuse for a brief period of time. Now he's with Pitt. Is this something, with losing J.P. Holtz, is this going to be a concern that Pitt didn't get a tight end in this recruiting class that is definitely going to be ready to play come day one this fall, without a doubt? Jim?
I actually think this is a legitimate concern at this point, because right now what you're looking at is Scott Orndorff as your primary tight end. You have Jamar Parrish, who's more of a fullback anyway. Devin Edwards, who's more of a blocker, and he's not really a guy you would expect to go out and run a route and catch a pass. He hasn't done it yet. Tony Harper just transferred. You mentioned Holtz. So really right now, I believe they moved a defensive end. I think Zach Poker rather. I think he moved the tight end to help fill out the roster. But if you can't get Clark eligible, if Orndorff goes down, you're kind of in a tough spot.
JD, do you think that this is a concern that, as Jim said, you might be in a very tough spot because you're pretty much putting all your hopes on Scott Orndorff not getting injured?
Yeah, when Narduzzi said yesterday they were trying to get him eligible, I kind of was very surprised, because my understanding of the NCAA rules is anybody that transfers now, you can't be immediately eligible. If the best case scenario is they're willing to add on a year towards the end of your eligibility, but I've seen Pitt, surprise me before in terms of NCAA eligibility. It's kind of a maze of rules and red tape and all that kind of good stuff, but I do definitely think it is a little bit of a concern going forward. Scott Orndorff has proven he can definitely catch the ball. He's not nearly as good as Holtz is in pass protection, but that's something that can be kind of forced into him and pushed on him a little bit. But it's definitely going to be a big area of need in the 2017 class. You're going to want those big type of guys, and I mean, Parrish is, as Jim said, a fullback. He has shown the ability to catch the ball, and he is a really just big blocker for anybody that needs it. But he isn't your traditional tight end.
And is everyone there?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so we might have had some technical difficulties. Again, this is very live, and that's why we still have Chris Bruno without video. He's struggling a bit, but again, it's a lot of fun being able to talk in this way. Just the day after signing day, and that's why we wanted to do this and to bring in a whole round table and provide that element. So moving on, different position, offensive line. Now, this position, they got Brandon Ford. They got Justin Morgan, who's a big body, had offers from Illinois and Rutgers. And they got Zach Williams, who had plenty of Power 5 offers, Louisville, Miami, NC State, along with West Virginia and Oregon State. Now, offensive line was a position that when Paul Christ was here, it was a really big position for him, a position that he focused heavily on. And with Paul Christ gone, Pat Narduzzi, do you think, Chris, that this was a position that Narduzzi prioritized? And if not, did he need it to be a bigger priority?
I don't think he really... It was not priority number one like it was with Chris. You have different styles now, and I think we're seeing that with Narduzzi's class with the defense and defensive backs. I think they did enough this year because of who they have coming back. People forget that Jared Jones-Smith is coming back. You have a lot of people. Brian O'Neill was the starting right tackle, and who knows, one of those tackles is going to have to move in maybe and play guard, and they're not taking Dorian Johnson's spot. So I think you have enough coming back, but it's definitely something they're going to have to address next year. In next year's recruiting class, I think you're going to see a little bit more of a priority on offensive line.
Very interesting. JD, and now again, by the way, Paul Christ, his class finished, some say just above, some say just below Pitt, but very even with Pitt. And again, you sort of have a built-in advantage being at Wisconsin, just the history of the program, at least recent history. But so again, all things considered, Pitt and Wisconsin's recruiting classes this year were pretty much even. But JD, do you think that the offensive line needs to be a bigger priority for Narduzzi either this year or, if not this year, moving forward?
I think for this year, Pitt's got a pretty stellar line coming back. Honestly, I think there's 3 NFL players on the line already. And I do think that, having a guy like we, converted Brian O'Neill over from tight end last year, and he pretty much started most of the season at right tackle and looked very good. And I think having another year of actually being a full offensive lineman will help a lot. I do think after this year, I mean, we're going to be Pitt's going to be losing Dorian Johnson, Jared Jones-Smith, Alex Bisnawati, who have pretty much anchored that line, for a while now. Those are going to be some pretty big losses, and I think in 2016, even though Pitt had a full year of recruiting, one of the trends where people are kind of seeing in college football recruiting is offensive linemen are committing earlier and earlier. I mean, you look at a guy, his name is escaping me now, of course, but he committed to Notre Dame over the summer. He's a 2017 guy. What was that?
Josh Love.
Yeah, exactly. So, get guys like committing 18 months before signing day now, and that's definitely a trend on the offensive line. For 2017, I wouldn't be surprised if they took up to 4 or 5 different linemen, for the different positions between guard and tackle and all that good stuff. So I definitely think for 2017, along with tight end, it's going to be a big, should be at least a big focus for the staff.
Very interesting. Now, moving on to the defensive side of the ball, I think without a doubt, and actually before we do position by position, well, you know what, we're going to wait till after. Afterwards, we'll talk about in terms of defense and what this meant. But just as a brief part of that, clearly the defensive end was a priority for Narduzzi and his staff. Makes sense. He comes from a defensive background, and the defense personnel-wise struggled last year and has been struggling the past few years. So without a doubt, it makes a ton of sense that they went after defense this year, and it certainly seems like they excelled at what they needed to do. So we'll start with defensive line and then work our way back. Defensive line, they got Amir Watts, a 4-star defensive tackle from Chicago. He committed about a week and a half ago on an official visit. It wasn't even clear that he was going to. He didn't intend to commit, and he ended up just being sold with the entirety of the program. Another one, Keyshawn Camp, originally committed to USC. He was a Trojan, backed out, and had offers for a ton of places. He chose Pitt from Florida. Bryce Hargrove also chose, and then Rashad Wheeler. So you've got 4 defensive tackles in a position that hasn't been great since Aaron Donald left. Aaron Donald, who now he's doing all this Super Bowl media stuff I saw today, and he's absolutely tearing it up in the NFL, Rookie of the Year, one of the best defensive players in all of football in the entire nation. And now he's going out to L.A. But that's a side note. Anyway, so Aaron Donald, he was a huge player for Pitt. Since then, they've struggled, and it looks like they put a pretty big priority on the defensive tackle position with Keyshawn Camp and Amir Watts. So, JD, looking at this position, looking at defensive tackle, is there a real replacement for Aaron Donald? Not that he's going to be as good, but is there a real replacement for him in this group?
Yeah, I think there's definitely great potential with this group. I think the biggest, probably, one of the things that Narduzzi's defense is predicated on is getting pressure on the quarterback so that even though his defensive backs are somewhat on an island and pressing, full quarter coverage, that there's pressure on everybody. But unfortunately this year, Pitt's defensive tackles, even though they started out pretty well, just weren't able to get any pressure on decent offensive lines in the ACC. And that's kind of why you would see those situations where Maddox or Pitts are kind of on an island and completely, going up for jump balls, and you get shorter, cornerbacks and that kind of thing like Maddox, and he's going to get beat on those plays. So they knew that right away after, a couple of games going into the season, and they made a conscious effort. They offered Camp back in September, I believe, while he was still a USC commit. And it's actually a pretty big statement to the staff because they just kind of kept in contact with him even though he was committed to USC, and then when he backed out of USC, he got calls from Ohio State, Penn State, other places, and he said, no, I feel like a backup plan to you guys. And Pitt, because they'd been pursuing him for so long, he felt like I definitely need to give Pitt a shot. And it speaks volumes about the staff's recruiting that they were able to get a guy with his offers in, and he's definitely a guy I would not be surprised plays next year, or even makes the 2 deep.
Very interesting. Jim, you put out an excellent piece on Cardiac Hill ranking every single recruit in this class, and anyone who's watching, I highly suggest you read that. And you actually rated Keyshawn Camp very high in this group, and you have a lot of faith that he's going to be a great player. So between Keyshawn Camp and Amir Watts, again a 4-star, and with all the other guys, is this a position that you think is really going to take a step to the next level so they can at least get closer to the position when Aaron Donald was still at Pitt, where people were afraid to try to run it up the middle when you have those defensive tackles?
I think so. I think they really, really stocked up defensive tackle this year. I mean, you look at a guy like Keyshawn Camp. Some people believe in the stars and rankings. I believe in offers, and when I look at his offer sheet, I see a lot of great things. When you see, Alabama, Florida, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC. I mean, a lot of people wanted him, and Pitt was able to win him out. He was only a 3-star on Rivals, but at ESPN he was very highly rated, and he helped out with Pitt's final class ranking. Look at Amir Watts, 3-star for most of the year, went to Western Michigan. He blew up this year. He was really highly coveted, and he chose Pitt over half the Big Ten, maybe even more than half the Big Ten. And even going to Rashad Wheeler, he was the star defensive lineman on the best football team in the state of Pennsylvania this year. He made a ridiculous play in the Whippeal final against Pine Richland, where he batted a ball and had a pick six. How many defensive tackles have pick sixes? I mean, they're a very athletic group, and just kind of out of default, one of them or two of them they're probably going to have to play next year. I mean, you kind of look at Tyreek Jarrett; he's probably locked into a spot. Next to him, it's wide open. You have guys like Tellini, who could maybe come in. Some of these lower-rated guys that Chris brought in the program, but you have experienced guys with lower pedigree against young guys with great offers and high pedigree. So it's going to be interesting come fall camp.
Yeah, it will absolutely be interesting, and but it is nice to see that defensive tackle was a priority for this recruiting class because, again, it's something that has, for the most part, been lacking since Aaron Donald left. It has not been the level that it was as a unit. And even when Donald was here, frankly, the defensive tackle unit wasn't excellent. It was mostly Aaron Donald just dominating, which now most of the country is seeing that happen. So moving forward to defensive end, you look at the guys they got: Zach Gilbert, Patrick Jones, Rashad Weaver, who was a last-minute commitment. He was decided between Penn State, Temple, and Pitt. He went with the Panthers. And on top of those three, you've got Dwayne Hendricks, who's a transfer, who is going to be playing finally after sitting out a year, who was just, it seems like, is going to be an excellent player. And we just found out yesterday that Juan Price got a 6th year of eligibility from the NCAA, so he will be playing one more season for the Pitt Panthers. So with who they're bringing back, with who they've got, Hendricks coming in, and then the official new recruits, Chris, do you think that the defensive line, both between the defensive ends and then also the tackles that we just talked about, do you think that this could be the best part, or at least one of maybe two best units on this entire Pitt football squad?
Absolutely. Defensive end is kind of the opposite right now of the defensive tackle, where we're all kind of nervous that one of these freshmen has to step in next year as a true freshman in the trenches and try and take one of the interior spots. Kind of have the opposite, where they could go about 5 or 6 deep on the defensive ends. And I mean, I've not seen him play, Dwayne Hendricks, but for those of us that went to the games last year, you look down on the sidelines and see him standing next to people when he's not in pads, and he's bigger than the people that are in pads. He absolutely, you hear people talk about an SEC defensive end. He looks like an SEC defensive end. So I think they're going to have a really, really strong defensive end, the outer parts of the defensive line. It's really the interior defensive line that just scares me to no end. So I don't know, but is anyone else looking forward to Hillgrove trying to decipher in a few years between Wheeler and Weaver?
Yeah, that'll definitely be interesting.
Jim, what do you think about this this defensive end group? Again, going more also on with the defensive tackles. Do you think that this unit is going to be really a force to be reckoned with? Because we know that Pat Narduzzi has talked plenty about stopping the run. That's priority number one for defense. You need to stop the run. On offense, you need to establish the run. On defense, you need to stop the run, and then from there the game expands, and that the game is won in the trenches on defense. So do you think that with Narduzzi's attitude, with the recruits that he's bringing in, do you think that this unit's going to really be a force to be reckoned with?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is one of those positions where it's going to happen immediately. Maybe not with these freshmen. You look at like Jones, Gilbert, Weaver. They're all guys that are probably going to redshirt, and that's a good thing. I like redshirts. It helps you get acclimated to the program, to college life, to college football. But just with having Edwards and Hendricks, you're ready to use them this year rather than just hear about them. That's exciting. Obviously, Hendricks is a big guy, a guy they really, really like. And, having Price back, the one thing that kind of gets me, and, I know a lot of Pitt fans, they're not up on Shakir Soto and Rory Blair, they're kind of up and down players. But if they're your fourth and fifth ends, that's not a terrible thing. Shakir Soto is essentially going to be like a 4-year starter, Blair like a 3-year starter, and they're not even starting for you anymore. So you only get them for 10 or 12 snaps a game at a high level. You'll start to see that potential we used to see with them. It kind of wore off whenever they had to play every down, but they're going to be fresh. So you're able to rotate more. You just have options now, and it just really seems like defensive ends gotten stronger overnight, and a big reason why is the whole Price 6-year eligibility thing.
Yeah, I don't think it can be understated enough, the fact that Juan Price, he had a huge year last season for the Pitt Panthers, and the fact that he's going to be able to come back, work with these younger guys, it's going to be fun to see, and I think that really is a big deal for Pitt football. Now moving forward to the linebacker position, they brought in 3. Kazon Pugh, 4-star player, absolutely, he looks like an incredible athlete. Then you talk about Chase Pine, there was some... last minute, a little bit of drama surrounding, really the only bit of drama for the most part for Pitt football, at least potentially negative. All the other drama was, can Pitt get a guy last minute who's maybe committed to another school or hasn't decided yet? And for the most part, the answer was yes. When you talk about Weaver and you talk about Matthews flipping in the last couple days, things like that. So the only real one in terms of would this guy flip from Pitt to another school was potentially Chase Pine. Now, many are saying that he actually wasn't really wavering. He just wanted to take a visit to Virginia Tech. But there was that bit of attention. And then Elias Reynolds. So, JD, looking at this set of people, talk about Kazon Pugh, what sort of athlete you think he's going to be. And then on top of that, Chase Pine, JD, do you think that whatever happened here, because I remember when people found out that he was going to be taking an official visit to Virginia Tech on the last weekend, some Pitt fans, now certainly a very small minority, and every fan base has them, but some were saying they should pull his offer immediately, don't let him make Pitt look bad, and this isn't the way that things should be run, so you should just pull his offer. Of course, they didn't do that. Chase Pine is coming to Pitt, and I think that he probably will be an excellent player in that unit. But JD, do you think that the distraction, you could call it, do you think that sets any sort of negative precedent with Pitt in the recruiting game?
Speaking on Kazon Pugh, I was lucky enough to go to one of Pitt's camps over the summer with their prospects and got to watch Kazon Pugh up close, and he was just, that expression man among boys. He's physically, he's so much more developed than most kids are his age. You look at a lot of guys in this class, and they're maybe a little bit skinny or whatever, but Pugh could go on a college field tomorrow and be completely, in his element. He's just athletically, he did extremely well at running back, and then linebacker, he hits hard, he schemes well, he gets to the ball. I really like Pugh a lot. Some people are saying that he, should have been ranked a lot higher in terms of Pennsylvania. Rivals has him as number 7. I've heard people say he should have been top 5, even top 3. Watching him play. So I actually think he won't redshirt next year. I think he probably will play just because of. I don't want to be growing our own players currently, but I think Pitt just needs some speed and some strength at the linebacker position, and he definitely would add both pretty quickly. Speaking on Chase Pine. There was a player that committed, fairly late in the process a couple of years ago, and then took a visit to Tennessee, and then on signing day had a whole ceremony, and Pitt fans were freaking out, and his name was Tyler Boyd.
Exactly.
Tyler Boyd ended up sticking with his commitment and coming to Pitt, and the rest is history. But these kids, they're not, a lot of us come from the judgment of, I'm 25. I think, how could a kid, be making these type of decisions? How could you tell coaches you're not going to go on a visit and then you do? And then, how can you, be saying all these different contradictory things? And then I remember what I was like when I was 17, and I could never make up my mind on anything. I was very impulsive, kind of just, that's what kids are, especially high school kids. And, when they get all of this pressure from different schools about, oh, you should come and see us, we're much better than so-and-so, that type of thing. I mean, some kids just want to enjoy the process a little bit, and I don't mind Pine going to Iowa State to actually meet with the coach that gave him his first ever offer at Toledo. So that, you get little things like that, and honestly, you watch his tape, and I'm willing to put up with a lot to get the kid that was on that tape. He hits really hard. At the signing event last night, he was one of 2 or 3 players that had audible oohs from the crowd, watching his highlight tape. And the kid played quarterback, too. He knows, what a quarterback's thinking and how they scheme and what they're looking for. So I think, that's going to be something valuable on defense.
Yeah, and you talk about the Tyler Boyd scenario and how people were. I mean, I can relate to that in a few ways. First of all, I was scrolling through Time Hop a couple of weeks ago, and for those who don't know, Time Hop is a great yet horrible app that allows you to remember what you tweeted or posted on Facebook on that day 3, 4, 5 years ago. And sometimes it gives you some fun insight, and sometimes it reminds you how immature you used to be, and just a lot of negative things. And first of all, one thing that it reminded me of was that someone had tweeted regarding Tyler Boyd a few years ago that when he decided to take that visit to Tennessee, that they should pull his offer, don't let him embarrass Pitt football. And I tweeted to that person, well, that would not be smart. Very, straightforward, but still, respectful. And I think that's true with Chase Pine, personally. I think that that's something that, it's not worth it, especially if the defense is he's going to make the program look bad. That's not a reason to pull an offer. And then another thing that I learned by looking at Time Hop is how immature that I was at 17. I mean, JD talked about how indecisive he was at 17. I'm 22. I'm still indecisive now. I couldn't figure out where I was going to go for dinner an hour and a half ago. So, that's like a constant struggle for me. I still struggle with that. And then you talk about someone who's got so many voices in his ear, and the voices in his ear, they're college football coaches. That this is their livelihood. This is what they do. And really, you talk about.
And even real quick, the thing is if you pull a guy's offer, you remove any chance of getting the kid. I mean. Right. At least if it's annoying, but if you stick with the kid and keep, say, we understand what you're doing, but, just to let you know, we might still be looking at other guys type of thing until you come back to us. If you're upfront with them and they're upfront with you, then, you still have a chance to get that player still. I mean, and it's, honestly, decommits aren't embarrassing anymore. I mean, yeah, if you lose one to a rival school or something like that, it's, oh my gosh, how could that happen? And, it stinks. But if, Michigan lost an offensive lineman to Stanford a week and a half ago, and nobody was like, oh my gosh, Michigan, how could they lose somebody like that? That's the nature of recruiting at this point is you're going to have decommits, you're going to flip other kids. I mean, Pitt flipped, I think, 5 kids in this class from other schools, which just kind of speaks volumes about, the way, recruiting is and how this staff approaches it.
Absolutely, and Pat Narduzzi was talking yesterday about the fact that they've flipped these players, and that's just part of the game. You don't really want that to be part of the game, but the fact of the matter is that when a guy commits somewhere, maybe in recruiting 5 or 10 years ago, you back off, but now someone commits somewhere, and you don't back off. You keep pursuing them all the way up till signing day, and whether you want that to be a part of the game or you don't, I personally would be happy without it, but the fact of the matter is that that's what recruiting is these days, and Pitt knows that. It's nice that they're not naive about it, and sometimes it's going to go the other way. Sometimes you're going to have an athlete like Chase Pine who wants to take a visit to Virginia Tech, and you have to be able to toe the line between still obviously wanting him to come to your program and also letting him want to figure out what's best for him, because at the end of the day, Narduzzi said this yesterday in his press conference, that's what you want. You want these recruits to be happy, whether that's at your school or a different school. So moving on to the final position, it's really 2 positions, but a lot of times you can't exactly figure out if a guy's a cornerback or a safety, and so we're just going to lump it all into defensive back. And this group it looks pretty incredible. You've got DeMar Hamlin, one of the top recruits in the state, one of the better quarterbacks in the country, certainly top 10. He's a 4-star. Bryson Garner. You got Theron Coleman. Henry Miller, who there was a bit of a late push from Miami. He's from Florida, and they've got Mark Richt now, who's a very good coach. And the Hurricanes made a push for him, and he stuck with Pitt. And at the end, it didn't even seem like it was that close. Flip was that, possible for him. And then finally, George Hill, who we talked about at the running back position, but it looks like he'll start out at defensive back. So, Jim, Phil Campbell also in the group. So, Jim, with all of these players, is defensive back now the position for Pitt football?
Right now it's looking that way, and, they wouldn't have brought this many defensive backs into the program without a reason. Obviously, they saw deficiencies last year, and they saw, Pitt really only played a couple corners and a couple safeties last year. They were so limited that they only played about 4 or 5 guys the whole season. So this year it's more about adding depth, adding options, having guys fresh. I think when you look at teams like Alabama and, the great Florida State teams, it's kind of like, yeah, you have starters, but you have guys that if they get hurt, they're just as good. And that's kind of what I feel about this class, because you look at the cornerback position, one of these freshmen is going to start. I'm not sure which one yet. Everyone would assume it to be Hamlin, but I'm still holding out, the possibility that Theron Coleman might, or Henry Miller. I mean, they're all three of them very good, and I believe Chris Peak mentioned on his Panther Layer podcast today that the coaches kind of told the incumbent defensive backs that these freshmen are coming and they're coming to play. So, make a name for yourself in spring football because come fall camp, these three are going to be ready to play. So are the safeties. So are Garner and Campbell. It's a really impressive group, and these are the 5 players a lot of people are talking about. It's the defensive back position.
Chris, do you think that this position is really the position now for Pitt football and the position that is the ultimate prize in terms of this recruiting class, the one that they came away with feeling the best about?
Absolutely. I mean, we talked about the offensive line and what it is now versus when it was Chris. It was kind of flip-flop. Now it's the defensive backs with the head coach Narduzzi. And, I mean, he's definitely bringing in his guys. I mean, you look at their height and look at how Michigan State played all those years that Narduzzi was there. I mean, you look at this height, it's 6'1", 6'1", 6'1", 6 foot, 6'3", and 6'1". Those are big, big, big defensive backs. And a lot of them are going to be ready to play on the field this coming fall. And like Jim said, I think the incumbent DBs have been kind of put on notice, save for, Jordan Whitehead. I don't think he was really put on notice, but, I think everybody else was.
Definitely fair, and yeah, I mean it's a unit that is it should be really exciting to watch. So now moving forward, this is an interesting topic and one that a lot of people pay attention to, and one that causes a lot of drama. That's the Pitt-Penn State rivalry, and it is back. Both on the field, of course, they're playing each other this season, but on top of that, it's back in terms of recruiting. I mean, these 2 programs went after a lot of the same guys, and Pitt tried to flip a couple recruits from Penn State, and Penn State tried to flip a couple recruits from Pitt. At the end, most were unsuccessful. Pitt was able to get Aaron Matthews, who committed to Penn State, and then flipped to Pitt. But on top of that, and many Pitt fans are feeling better about the rivalry with Penn State in terms of recruiting, and they should be, because this year there weren't any recruits who were committed to Pitt who flipped to Penn State, and that happened, I believe, twice last year. So without a doubt, Pitt has they've taken a step up in terms of recruiting, and they can really hang with the best of them without a doubt. That said, things aren't perfect. They still didn't get everyone that they wanted. The top recruit in the state, according to many, is Miles Sanders. Pitt wanted him badly, and Penn State got him. And Pitt then tried to flip him after he verbally committed, and he stuck with Penn State. And so he's going to go to State College, and that was one that Pitt missed on. Another one was Shaka Toney from the Philly area, from my area, and Chris is living out here as well. And this is a guy who, again, this isn't as natural in terms of Pitt country, whereas Miles Sanders is from Western PA. Toney's not, but Pitt tried to make a late push to get Toney to flip, and he didn't. He's sticking with Penn State. So, again, you're talking about a lot of back and forth with these two programs, and really it seems to me it's like the opposite of last year. It's the inverse, because last season Pitt they got the number 1 recruit in the state, which is Jordan Whitehead. But then you look at the top 20, and Penn State certainly got more of them than Pitt did. This year, it's pretty much the opposite of that. Penn State got the top recruit in the state. They got Miles Sanders, and they got some other great recruits as well, without a doubt. But then you look at Pitt, they got 7 of the top 20. Penn State got 4 of the top 20. So we're going to open this up to all 3 of you. And by the way, I will be right back. I have to go grab a charger because my computer is eating up battery way faster than I thought. So I'll be right back. But what do you guys think of the sort of this situation flipping? The fact that last year Pitt got the number 1 player in the state, Penn State, though, had, it seemed like, more depth in recruiting. This year it's the other way around. Penn State got the best player, but Pitt has 3 more players in the top 20 than Penn State does. Jim, what do you think?
I think it's notable right now with the Pitt-Penn State battle, because I think in time it's really already, the gap has closed significantly. You talk about last year, not so much even the top 20 ranked players. You talk about guys with mutual offers, whether Pitt or Penn State. They have the same offer sheet, and generally last year most of them went to Penn State, and this year it's kind of more even than in the past. So I think a lot of that is having Narduzzi, having longer than a couple weeks to recruit. I think kids kind of buy into what he was saying. And I just kind of feel like there's momentum with the Pitt program right now. I don't know if that's me being a bias kind of thing, but it just kind of feels with this recruiting class, the way Narduzzi talks, the new uniforms coming out. I know 8-5 is a couple wins better than last year. It just feels like there's momentum. So it seems more attractive right now than Penn State. Well, maybe not more attractive, but more attractive than it did last year. Just a lot of different variables go into that, and I think a lot of that is Narduzzi, and I think they lost Miles Sanders, they lost that battle, but they won a lot of other battles, and it's just more fun right now when both teams are able to get one guy from one another, as in the past when last year Penn State pretty much dominated. They did dominate the state. This year they did not dominate the state.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, I was just going to say that's definitely a good way to put it. JD, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Terry Smith was asked yesterday about if he feels there's a rivalry with Pitt, and he said no because they pretty much get who they want in Pennsylvania. I mean, if there wasn't a rivalry, then, I don't know, I don't even feel the need, if you wouldn't even feel the need to take a dig at Pitt like that. You could just say, well, they're a very good program, and we're just trying to do what, Penn State wants to do type of thing. You could have done some, kind of brush off answer, but he chose to kind of take a dig at Pitt, especially after this year. And since January, 5 players picked Pitt over Penn State, and that's not me, just making things up. I mean, that's, Keshawn Camp, Penn State wanted him to visit. He just straight up told them no. Amir Watts was talking to Penn State and pretty much had a visit scheduled, and then after he visited Pitt, he canceled it. Obviously, Aaron Matthews, Rashad Weaver, and I'm blanking on the last guy, but I did remember that there was 5 different guys that had all, picked Pitt over Penn State towards the end. And that's not even counting the flips that Penn State tried to have happen. He talked about we get who we want in Pennsylvania, except towards the end, they're desperate and trying to offer Pitt guys, and Pitt guys are just straight up telling them no. And it's not they went to visit like Shaka Toney did and then have like another announcement where Franklin himself admitted was extremely nervous that Toney was going to flip. Pitt never even got to that point with any of its recruits. As soon as Penn State called the guys that they wanted to commit, they said thanks but no thanks, and then called Narduzzi and said Penn State just tried to offer me, but I'm sticking with Pitt. I mean, that speaks volumes about, this staff. And Penn State, as Corey pointed out, does have the more, quote, elite players in this class between Miles Sanders, Manet, and McGovern. But if you look at the dates, I mean, all of those guys, I think, committed before May of last year. I mean, it was a very early on thing where Pat Narduzzi hadn't even, barely moved into his house yet, and those 3 guys are already off the board. But since then, I think we lost Cameron Brown in the summer, and then that was about it. Pitt won every other battle after that. And especially straight up until the end, DeMar Hamlin I mean, that says a lot. I mean, he had Ohio State and Penn State coming at him hard, and Penn State wanted Hamlin bad. I mean, they were visiting just as much as Pitt and doing everything they could. You know, they got the whole limo to try to get Khaleke Hudson and, you know, had Aaron Matthews and Miles Sanders on it, and the only guy they ended up with was Miles Sanders. And I truly think that if Narduzzi had been hired a year earlier, Sanders would have been a Panther. It wouldn't even been a question. I mean, you know, he can talk about, you know, he was always committed and all this kind of stuff, but he visited more Pitt games this fall than most Pitt commits did. And, you know, I understand, you know, their whole situation, and I think losing Chaney probably was the thing that tipped the scales in terms of Sanders. It kind of just shook him out of looking at Pitt, and he said, no way, no thanks. But I do know even in the last couple of weeks, he wasn't, you know, ignoring Pitt coaches' calls. He was talking to him. So, you know, it's just kind of funny, that whole rivalry. To me, it's fun. I like having these discussions, and I love that the game is coming back, because for the past couple of years it's been, you know, fighting in the kids' living rooms, essentially, in terms of recruiting. And now finally all these kids that, you know, Pitt and Penn State have been recruiting for all these years finally actually get to play on the field, and let's see what happens.
Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we've discussed, I'm a little older than everybody else. So growing up and getting, my sister went to Penn State, and living out here in Philly, having my high school coach, the football coach of my high school, went to Penn State, played at Penn State. My whole life it's just been get the crowbar, shove down the Penn State, down Chris's throat. Every single year, we do it the right way. We get the kids we want. You don't. Blah 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 blah. It's nice to see some desperation from the other side. It's a big joke in my office of 200 people that half the office comes from Penn State, the other half comes from Temple. So, you know, we have like 3 Pitt fans in the entire office. It was really nice to, you know, I am the Penn State fans and say, oh, DeMar Hamlin's announcing tonight. Looks like it's Pitt. And just getting the ugh in return. And we got that a lot. And I think JD touched on, you know, Pat Narduzzi had barely moved into his house last year when he was trying to recruit against them. I can't remember what the tipping point was, but for me, the first time I really saw Penn State and the scales kind of tip a little bit was the radio phone call from James from State College, and I can't remember what it was that set that off. If somebody else can, let me know, but that was the first time you saw a little bit of desperation on their side, and then it just kept going, and then the GIFs that were posted when he was going down the list and calling recruits to try and get them to visit at the end was just priceless for me.
Yeah. No, and it's definitely, I mean, what's fun is I got to Pitt in 2008. I wasn't even a fan of college sports. When I was at Pitt, our rival was West Virginia. I didn't really even care that much about Penn State, but since James Franklin has been there, I hate Penn State. And we haven't played a single down, and I haven't watched Pitt and Penn State be on the same field in my lifetime. And that's how much, you know, both coaching staffs, and I think Paul Chryst was, you know, you can say whatever you want about his coaching, but he was definitely not the most dynamic personality. He didn't have a fire. I feel like that, you know, James Franklin was definitely the much brighter fire, so to speak, in the state of Pennsylvania and got a lot more attention. But since Narduzzi has been in place, it's definitely much, much more even. And instead of Franklin kind of, you know, even fighting back more, he's actually reserved more. He's kind of saying, you know, well, we came in, we said we dominate the state, but, you know, sanctions this and, you know, negative recruiting that and all that kind of stuff. It's for the first time I'm seeing Penn State coaches make excuses for why Pitt's beating them in different areas. And I don't know, it's just interesting to me. And even with, you know, they'll talk about sanctions again. You'll hear at every Penn State game, they'll talk about sanctions all year. Penn State didn't even sign a full class this year. They signed, I think, 20 or 21 guys, and they could have gone to 25 very easily. They've got the scholarships for it, as we all know. And so it's kind of well, how can you complain that you don't have enough guys when you don't even sign as many as you can, you know? So.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun rivalry, and I agree. I mean, JD, you and I, you know, we both somewhat recently graduated from Pitt. I just graduated in the spring, and I mean, when I was there, especially at the beginning, my freshman year was 2011. That was the last year of the Backyard Brawl. And it was, I mean, it was ingrained. That was the rivalry. And the Penn State thing was there, but it's certainly gotten a lot bigger since. And in large part, it's because of James Franklin, and then in large part, it's because of Pat Narduzzi and the fact that, as opposed to Paul Chryst, Narduzzi has embraced the rivalry, and that's both on the field and off. Now, sticking with Pat Narduzzi, let's talk about him a little bit, because this is his first full recruiting class, and many would say that it was a big success. I mean, first of all, on Twitter, it was absolutely huge. JD dubbed the Pat signal, and that's something that now and he's very happy about that.
Does not get enough credit for that one.
Yeah, no, yeah. So, I mean, that's something that has gotten, honestly, national attention, but certainly all Pitt fans and followers know, Pat signal, that's a big thing. When he tweets out Pitt is it, everyone starts going nuts, and it creates a lot of excitement, and a lot of the edits going out there, and just all these things on Twitter, without a doubt, it's been a big thing. From Pat Narduzzi down with the other coaches tweeting GIFs of different comical things, to the fans starting that Stay Home 412 the other day. That was started by the fans, and it was a big thing. It was trending in Pittsburgh, and so Twitter's become a huge part of it, something that obviously Paul Chryst hadn't done before, and in Narduzzi's first full class, he utilized to the utmost extent. This is also without a doubt, top 30 class. I mean, ESPN they're kind of an odd site, but you talk about Rivals, 24/7, and Scout, they all say without a doubt this is top 30, just outside top 25. And so you look at that, and that means that it's the best class quantitatively since 2008, and since Dave Wannstedt was here. And so with everything going into it, with all of that stuff, Jim, how effective has Pat Narduzzi been with the entire recruiting game? Because, I mean, you talk about there's so much that really does go into it. And one thing that he said yesterday in the press conference that I thought was just hilarious, and I thought was probably the best quote of the day, was someone asked him what he learned from now his first full recruiting class. And he says, I've learned that it's a crazy business. I mean, what are we doing chasing teenagers around through high schools? And it was, to me, that was just hilarious. I mean, Jim knows more than anyone. Last week I was cracking up because he mentioned something about Jim Harbaugh climbing up trees and having sleepovers, and it just hit me that this is such a ridiculous sort of thing. That said, of course, here we are talking about it, but that, it really does get to the point where, Jim Harbaugh's having sleepovers and guys are chasing kids around high schools, and the whole thing is kind of ridiculous. And I think one thing that I personally like about Narduzzi is that he knows that, and he understands it, and at the same time, he knows the game and how to play it, but he also sort of knows when you take a step back that it's all a little bit nutty. And I like that. I mean, it's a part of it, and it's a lot of fun, and we enjoy following it, but at the end of the day, to have perspective, I think, is a refreshing thing. But again, back with everything going into it, Jim, with the selling, with his philosophy, the positions that he was looking at this year, with the geography, he got guys. He really did a great job getting a lot of guys from the Pittsburgh area to stay home, to go to Pitt. He got a lot of people from Ohio, got some from Jersey, New York, not a ton in the Philly area, and then he went down south more to ACC territory, Virginia, one from North Carolina, and then a couple from Florida. So, Jim, first full class, how do you think that he did at recruiting?
I think he did an excellent job, and part of that is because we were kind of used to what it used to be under Paul Chryst. Pat Narduzzi is the ultimate showman. Maybe not so much Jim Harbaugh, but he knows how to play the game. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to create a show and create a buzz, and that's kind of what you have to do in college football these days. There's maybe the 4 or 5 programs that don't have to run through hoops and do stuff like that. Maybe, Nick Saban's not doing the same stuff Pat Narduzzi is, but Pat Narduzzi knows how to do it, and he's getting kids excited about Pitt football, a team that was 6-6 for 4 straight years prior to him being here. The last national championship coming up on the 40-year anniversary of that. So he has people excited, and he knows what he's doing. He's hitting the home base hard. He's hitting the WPIAL hard. He's building relationships with high school coaches because it's a very fertile ground. He's hitting Eastern Ohio because that's where he's from, and that's what he did at Michigan State. He's dipping into North Carolina, Virginia. He's going after legacy recruits. You see that with Sean Gilbert. And, you look at New Jersey this year, that's an area Penn State used to own, and Pitt didn't really get in there this year, but Michigan State and Ohio State did. So there's room for him to even go a little bit further east. He went up into New York City, made some impact, and like I said on my article earlier today, you can never have enough kids from Florida. So he's doing a broad reach. He's going all over the direction, but I think the most important thing he's doing and what he's going to try to do, and what Wanstead always tried to do, is protect home, build a fence around the Whitfield, and I think that's what he's trying to do. And, you know, you look ahead to next year, he already has arguably the best player in the Whitfield according to ESPN, Paris Ford. Just outside the Whitfield, my hometown, he has X-Ray Low, awesome player too. If he was in the Whitfield, he'd be even more hyped than he is. And a lot of the kids in that group, they're already, I don't want to say leaning Pitt, but you kind of think they are. So he's already made an impact in such a short amount of time.
GD?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, just speaking geographically, excuse me, I'm a smart man, obviously. You know, he got a little bit of everything from, you know, some places. As Jim mentioned, maybe a little bit more into New Jersey, but New Jersey was dominated by Michigan and Ohio State and some other programs this year that they really hit that area hard. But he got guys from New York, he got guys from Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, Florida. He even went into middle of Big Ten territory in Chicago and got Amir Watts out of there, you know, which is impressive in and of itself. They had they had a couple feelers on guys out in California that, you know what, I don't mind if Pitt coaches take, you know, a couple of trips out there in a year just to, you know, check in, make sure that Pitt's presence is known. I was talking to Rob Harley last night, and one of the things he said was before the season they were having some good success. They were having guys that were excited, you know, about Pitt, but once the season started and all of the, maybe promises isn't the right word, but all of the things that they were saying they were going to do with Pitt, this is what we're going to do differently this year. We're going to be, you know, much better defensively. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And then it kind of, you know, as the season went on, kids started realizing these coaches are doing exactly what they said they were going to. And, you know, revitalizing the program, getting fans on board, you know, winning more games, winning games that Pitt, you know, is down in the fourth quarter. I mean, you know, there were so many games this year that Pitt fans were pulling their hair out because they thought Pitt was going to blow it, just like old times. But these coaches don't know what pitting is. I mean, and then after the season, you know, they hit guys hard and got some of the best players in the class after the season ended. And, you know, brought in guys on official visits for, you know, weekends that, you know, we didn't even have a football game for, but they still got those guys. And, you know, Chris Peak mentioned a stat, something like 26 out of the 30 guys that visited Pitt, you know, became, it's obviously not 26 because the class size wasn't that high, but something in that ratio of that many guys that came on official visits committed to Pitt. And the only two that didn't commit that most people feel like Pitt really wanted were Shaka Toney and Kalik Hudson. But everybody else, they nailed official visits. There was that one weekend in, I think it was either late November or early December, where they got 5 commits from that one weekend. And just we're doing really, really well. And it's, you know, it speaks volumes about that. And the Pitt fan base, we're not the biggest fan base in the world, but on Twitter we're pretty big. You know, we love Twitter. It's a thing for us, and I think we have a pretty great community, you know, just in terms of since I've been on, you know, since like it was 2010 or something like that, so, you know, before a lot of people had Twitter, and just to watch it grow and see all these people that, you know, have always been into Pitt sports, but then just found this new group of people that are just as insane as them. Pat Narduzzi has tapped into that. He's tapped into that nuts, you know, behavior on Twitter. And the other night we just wanted to say to some of the local kids, hey, we still want you to come to Pitt. Stay home 412. And it may not necessarily have had the desired effect, but Pitt fans had a ton of fun on Twitter. We got that amazing recruiting video that I don't understand why that's been hiding for, you know, the last couple of months. But, you know, that was just a fun night of Pitt fans just celebrating our school and having some fun.
Absolutely. And Pitt Twitter, without a doubt, is it's fun. I mean, I'm someone, again, I came to Pitt in 2011. I wasn't on Twitter till 2012, maybe even 2013. And since then, that's been a huge part of being a Pitt fan, is going on and seeing these people who maybe you've never met in person. And since then, I've been able to meet a good amount. But, you know, just seeing people have fun with it. Chris, what do you think about Pat Narduzzi's first full year with recruiting?
I think it's just, Jim and JD touched on it. He's done so much, not just in the recruiting aspect, but just in the fan base aspect, getting them excited by just doing little things like that video. Everyone went crazy over that video, and rightfully so. It was great. you look at other things. I have 2 season tickets. My mom and dad called me. My mom, lifelong Penn State fan. My dad has turned completely to Pitt. And they said, can you get 2 more for next year? And I said, all right. So I tried and couldn't even get them really close to me, but got 2 more. There's people on Twitter that are, right before we got on this podcast, said, I'm buying Pitt tickets for the first time. That's great. He's energized, and, we've always talked about, Wannstedt talked about it, everyone talked about keeping people home. No one's really been able to do it. Wannstedt probably came the closest. That video the other night was like, you hate to keep harping on that, but how do you not see that, see all the tweets from kids? I believe David Adams congratulated Hamlin on his decision. That's definitely a big 2017 recruit. We talked about Josh Lugg. How do you not see the excitement? And even though Lugg's committed to Notre Dame, he's definitely got a lot of ties to Pitt. And I really don't know if that one's, dead yet, and I don't really think it will be. I think that might be a battle that turns into possibly. But, he's definitely done a great job recruiting and doing everything he said he was going to do when he came in.
Yeah, and without a doubt, and even I think Martavis Bryant posted on Instagram congratulating Damar Hamlin. And so it's definitely something that, it seems like the city is coming together, and that's without a doubt exciting. So moving forward, let's go to the Three Rivers pack of questions. Again, this is something, if you're new to Unscripted, every week that we've been doing the podcast, we always do a Three Rivers pack of questions, just 3 relatively, straightforward questions with, straightforward answers. And we've got the 3. We'll have each of you answer each 3. Again, pretty straightforward. And so let's just do the first one. So first question, Three Rivers, who is going to be, of all these recruits, the best player this upcoming freshman season? Jim?
I'm going to go with Keyshawn Camp. I think there's a window of opportunity for a defensive tackle to come in and make a difference. And when you have a guy like Tyreek Jarrett kind of eating space, good defensive ends on either side of you, I think there's room for a freshman defensive tackle, 6'3", 275, to make some plays. And he obviously has the ability and the talent.
JD?
I think Damar Hamlin's a pretty obvious choice for anybody, but I talked a lot about him before. I think Kazan Pugh is definitely going to make an impact this year. I definitely see him being a part of Pitt's linebacking core for the year and making some big plays. There's, Nick Grigsby, Freeze, as the team likes to call him, left after this year. And, there'll be some openings there that either by him leaving or just Kazan Pugh maybe having some better talent can definitely sneak in there and make an impact. Chris?
I like both of those picks, but I'm going to go with the obvious one in Hamlin. After looking at his tape again, he's the real deal, and there's definitely a spot there for him to take when he comes in the fall.
And I'm going to go, I'm going to, just because I want to stray a little bit, I'm going to go with Kazan Pugh. I think that he is really going to be a very talented player and really can make big plays. Also, a shout-out, sort of the other one that I was thinking about is Ruben Flowers. I think that he's going to do a really good job. There is a solid opening at the wide receiver position, and I think Ruben Flowers is going to pretty instantly make a bit of a difference. So, second question, Three Rivers pack of questions. Who of this entire recruiting class is sort of your dark horse, the guy that not too many people are talking about who you think is going to make a big difference? JD?
It's definitely Theron Coleman. I felt for a while he should have been a 4-star recruit. I don't think the City League gets as much respect. You're seeing a little bit of that again with a guy like Kenny Robinson, also out of the City League next year. I definitely think Coleman's got really great size. He reads the ball really well. He hits hard. He's got great length. The guys that train him, those Evolve coaches, they call him, their prodigy. He does everything that they want him to do. Athletically and schematically, so I'm definitely going to be looking him to challenge with Hamlin and Miller for that starting quarterback spot. I would not be surprised at all if Coleman got it over Hamlin. I know that sounds crazy, but some people think Coleman is that good.
Jim, what do you think?
Just to build off that last statement, JD, I also think Coleman is that good and could even be better than Damar Hamlin. You trade him from the City League school to Central Catholic, put Hamlin on the City League school. Yeah, does it make a difference? Probably. I mean, Central Catholic's the team in the state, and the City League isn't that highly regarded. But a guy that I'm thinking off the radar is Patrick Jones Jr., defensive end, freak, 6'6", 240, just a big kid, and he kind of reminds me a few years ago the kind of defensive ends Wannstedt used to get. Greg Romius, Jabal Sheard, those kind of guys, and that's what he looks like to me. Maybe not as highly recruited, but he's already on campus. He has a leg up on everyone. Defensive end stacked this year, but down the line, I think Patrick Jones is going to be a real player for this program.
Chris?
I definitely see the allure of Coleman. I'm going to go with, just so I don't just agree with somebody, I was going to go with him, but I'll go with Phil Campbell in the backfield, in the defensive backfield. I like him a lot.
Okay, I'm going to... does Chase Pine count as a dark horse, or is he too highly regarded? I don't know. What do you guys think?
He's a 3-star on Rival, so, I mean...
No, why not?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to go with Chase Pine. I think that he is really talented, really athletic. Again, I think that linebacker position lends itself to some guys who can really make a big difference. And I think that he's going to do some big things for Pitt football. Okay, final question. Three Rivers pack of questions. Now that 2016 is over in terms of recruiting, Junior Day is coming up just this weekend. I know Jim tweeted out a couple days ago. You've got everything that went into yesterday, National Letter of Intent Day. We've got this today, this episode of UnScripted. Junior Day is coming up this weekend, and then you hope to not hear anything about recruiting for at least a month. Some say more. And so, but with next year already, Junior Days this weekend, the coaches already have to. They can't relax. They have to already be recruiting for next year. So, looking for next year and what they got this year, what do you think is either a specific recruit, or just a position that you think that they really have to hone in on and focus on for the class of 2017? Jim?
I think obvious answers would be offensive line and especially tight end. That might be a year where they have to grab a couple tight ends. Not anyone in specific in the state. I think they offered a bunch of kids recently, and I think tight end is a position they hit hard. I also think getting a big impact running back would make a difference. There is one in the state down in Philly, DeAndre Swift. I don't know if Pitt has enough pull just yet to get the best player out of Philadelphia, but I'm sure this staff will give it all they have.
JD?
I would say if I had to pick a player, at least locally, that I would want bad, you have a guy like Lamont Wade, but after Pitt's recruiting class this year, obviously you would take any time you can get the top 5 player in the country, or top 10, whatever he's at now, you would take him. But Pitt's really done well with that position with this class. I actually think David Adams from Central Catholic, he's a guy I have no question would start day one as a freshman at linebacker. He's great physically. He is just a really intelligent kid in terms of football IQ and all of that stuff. Jim mentioned the offensive line. Pittsburgh Sports Now just had an article today with Rob Hainsey, who's originally out of Gateway, about 200-300 feet from my apartment here. And even though he's down in Florida, with IMG, which is just that powerhouse Florida program that just pumps out, prospects every year, he says he's still interested in Pitt and he's still going to be visiting here. I think he's a long shot, but that's the kind of guy that would do really well, at Pitt, and Pitt would make a pretty big statement to land somebody like that for the offensive line.
Chris, what do you think?
Just to touch on it, I mean, it's no doubt offensive line, tight end. I'd really like to see them land C.J. Thorpe. I believe Central Catholic offensive lineman. That'd be great. But, as JD pointed out, David Adams, I think, could start day one right off the bat. Jim, as far as, DeAndre Swift, don't worry, Corey and I are on that. We're just going to kidnap him, put him in a room for about a year, and just continuously pump, Pitt videos at him the entire time. So that's taken care of. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I'll vouch with Chris being out here in the Philly area, me as well. We'll do our part working on that, and also as many people know, at least Pitt students, there's this whole running joke. I know JD could attest to this, that it seems like at least 50% of the Pitt student body is from, quote, outside of Philly. And that's definitely, I fall into that category without a doubt. And, it's definitely, moving forward, again, Pitt didn't get a big contingent of recruits from Philly. They haven't in a while, but with a lot of people in the Philly area, just speaking for myself, knowing more about Pitt, there is room there for Pitt to really grow. And as Jim mentioned, you don't know if you can get the top guy right off the bat in 2017, but it's definitely an area that Pitt, if they can stick with, without a doubt, think that Pitt can grow in this area. In terms of me, for me, position-wise, I think it's pretty obvious. Offensive line and tight end, those are the two that you really have to look at. And in terms of an actual recruit, I think Paris Ford is. Oh wait, Pitt already. I think they already got a commitment from him for 2017, and so I think things are looking pretty good there.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about Paris Ford too is he's known as a defensive guy, but he can play offense too. And I was told by many people that if Paris Ford committed, he'd be Pitt's hardest recruiter, and I vastly underestimated how true that statement is. I mean, the kid constantly throughout the year was, texting with kids and trying to get them on board. And you'll hear people, you'll see him, tweeting about his offers and stuff that he gets. But the kid is so solid with Pitt. I haven't seen a picture of the kid in the last 4 or 5 months that he wasn't wearing something Pitt related. He's about as Pitt Panther as you can get, which is really exciting because he's a top 40 player in the country, and he has an infectious personality that I think recruits in this area are really attached to.
Yeah, it's definitely fun to see. Okay, so finally, the last thing, again, we do this every week on UnScripted, the Cardiac Hill podcast. We have a Panther of the Week, and we talk about someone, whoever you want, who you think really just deserves that award, that honor. It's pretty straightforward. At the episode that Jim and I did, the sort of 2015 year in review, we did a Panther of the Year. And so for this special on-camera live signing day special, let's do, instead of Panther of the Week, let's do Panther of the Class. So, JD, of all these guys, who is your Panther of the 2016 recruiting class?
I'm probably... Man, I'm going to go with Thomas McVitie just because I think, especially towards the end with the whole offensive coordinator absence, and he didn't panic. He let Pitt, work it out, gave Pitt a chance to kind of figure the situation out, and then come back to him and say, hey, we still want you, just as badly as, when you committed. A lot of people were really worried, but from my understanding, the kid was just straight up ignoring LSU coaches towards the end. The kid really wanted to be a Panther, and that, says a lot about this staff and says a lot about the school that, one of Pitt's very first commits, even though things directly affecting him towards the end, he's still stuck by Pitt. So I'm going to go with McVitie.
Chris, who's your Panther of the class?
You know what? I'm going to go with a legacy and say Zach Gilbert, simply just because of his dad, Sean. His dad was an absolute beast, and just continue the legacy. And I think we all know that Pitt has lost out on some legacies over the last several years. This one they did not lose out on, and it wasn't even really close. So I'll go with him.
Jim, how about you? Panther of the class, who do you got?
I'm going to go with Damar Hamlin. I think he brings the most significance outside the program. When people look at Pitt and they look at the recruiting class, they're going to see Damar Hamlin's name. And whenever they watch Pitt in September this year, they're going to see Damar Hamlin on the field. He is going to be the player most resonated with Pat Narduzzi's first full recruiting class. These two are now linked for pretty much both of their legacies.
I'm going to have to echo you, Jim. I think Damar Hamlin, I mean, there have been a couple players since I've started to follow Pitt football and Pitt recruiting in about 2011, 2012. I guess 2011. The first one being Tyler Boyd. Now, obviously, that one, in hindsight, seems obvious. Most people knew that, figured he was going to be very good. I just remember having just this feeling that he was going to be incredibly special. The other one was Jordan Whitehead. Just that feeling, this guy is really going to do some big things. And the third guy, I mean, I didn't get it. Certainly, I didn't get it for James Conner. I didn't see that one coming. There were some other players as well that, but there are three people that I have just gotten that feeling for. This guy's going to be really special. Tyler Boyd, Jordan Whitehead, and now Damar Hamlin. I really strongly believe he's going to be a huge player, and he's, I mean, as Jim said, he's going to be tied to Pat Narduzzi, but I think this is going to be one of those guys who really is a big deal in terms of legacy for Pitt. I mean, this is way down the line, but this is a guy who can be a superstar in college, who, could really do some big things in the NFL, who can be one of those guys that you are just proud to say his name, that, that he went to Pitt. Some guy, you talk about NFL Now, Aaron Donald, and LaShawn McCoy and Darrelle Revis, and then of course the legends out there, Dan Marino and Mike Ditka and Tony Dorsett. You know, I'm not, you know, going as far to say that he's going to be one of the greatest athletes of all time, but what I am saying is that I just have this feeling that he's going to be a big difference maker for Pitt football, and he's going to be a really a special player. So that just about does it for this episode of Unscripted, the Cardiac Hill podcast, this live episode. We want to thank everybody for tuning in. Jim, for, you know, really coming up with the idea and you know, helping me make this happen. JD, obviously, and Chris, you know, for everything. And again, everyone who tuned in, it's been a whole lot of fun. The live thing is definitely, I mean, you know, we didn't get video for Chris. I had to go run and get a charger for my laptop, but it's definitely been a fun experience. It's been nice to be able to do it live, to do it on camera. Hopefully everyone liked it. This will go up on cardiachill.com, and while you're there checking out this video, in case you missed any of it, check out some of the other things. Again, this entire week with recruiting, everyone did a great job. I know that I talked about Jim's article ranking all the recruits, but everyone here put out some really good stuff for Cardiac Hill this week, and so make sure you check it out. It's I mean, I'm part of the team, but it is an excellent site for Pitt fans to really check out what's happening with Pitt football, with Pitt recruiting, with everything that's going on. So again, thank you guys for joining me. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. So one last time for this live on-camera episode of Unscripted, the Cardiac Hill podcast, I'm Corey Cohen, signing off.